Okay. Well, welcome everyone. And like Mary said, I'm sad that this is our last session, and
We all are.
I do want to just do it all over again. Oh well, we'll try to make it a very good one. Okay. So as we do with each session, I want to see if there are specific areas that need addressed or you have questions. So please chime in. We'll start with Joanne.
No, I'm just really, I'm very anxious to be able to have an hour to just sit down and play and really think about how you did it and work the process. I feel the process is finally looking in my head the way it never has been. And I see the steps. I'm sure I'll have questions as I go along, but this has been so helpful, the whole class.
Okay.
I just
I'm
think
delighted
to see Photoshop from start to finish that you've done as the steps to apply.
Okay. All right.
Really
very good.
Much clearer.
Well, that makes me happy. And Sandy just jumped in, so we'll welcome Sandy. Sandy, we're just starting with questions and things. I'll give you a moment to get situated, and so welcome. And I'll ask Jolie if you have any specific questions.
I did do a layered a photograph. I was so excited. I don't know if I guess I kept it. I do have a question. I'm having a little technical issue that I will ask you about later. It involves my external hard drive and Lightroom and Photoshop combined. But
okay.
So what I ended up doing is just opening a photograph that I had previously edited in Photoshop. It was a TIFF, and I played with it and layered it. And at the end, I just want to ask you about flattening versus, like in that case where it's not going back into Lightroom.
Okay.
What does flattening do exactly? And would you flatten, if you did it that way, would you flatten it and save it that way? Because it asked, when I clicked on flatten, and it gives this warning.
I would never flatten.
Okay.
The only time I flatten is in the old days when I didn't go in and out of Lightroom and I wanted to make an image that would be smaller, because when you flatten your layers, your image becomes much smaller. Okay, it bakes all those things into one layer. So instead of a layer cake where you can see all your delicious chocolate ganache and raspberry filling and all of those different things, it all gets smushed together. And you can't ever retrieve it.
I can't hear.
None of us can.
It'll come back.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Yes, lost you completely there for a while.
All right.
We lost you.
We ended with this gesture by you.
All right, so I think we're okay now, I hope. Okay, so I would never flatten, because if you imagine a layer cake with a chocolate ganache filling and a raspberry filling and your little cake layers, yummy, yummy, right?
Imagine it all.
Yeah, we want to keep all those layers, but when we flatten, it all smushes together and you can never bring it back up again. Now, you can, if you want to, for some reason, save space, you can merge visible, and then you can export a file, a JPEG from that, and then come back and unmerge. If there was some reason that you wanted, that you had to send it out of Photoshop just right then, or you wanted to send out a smaller file, you can merge visible, and that you can undo. Once you flatten and close your file, you cannot undo that. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
And merge visible is, I don't know if I'd ever want to do that, but that's under.
It's right in the same thing, and I'll show you. It just gives you a wider range of possibility by merging visible. And merging visible means that it's only going to merge the layers that have the eyeballs turned on. If you have a layer that you have turned off and you click merge visible, it's not going to merge that layer into your image. I'll show you when we go into Photoshop. Okay? All right, so let me make a note about that.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Anything else, Jolie?
And that's all I had. That's my main question.
Okay.
No, I'm going to ask you later about what's going on with my external hard drive and my computer.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, Suzette, my dear. Any
I'm
questions?
still I'm still working on my Lightroom issues, so I'm not
Okay.
ready for this conversation yet, and I need to make my one-on-one with you so I can get by some of this stuff and move
Yes,
forward.
please. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Bob, any questions?
Eventually.
I'm sorry, did you, Bob? Is Bob here? Bob?
I think she should unmute us.
I'm not
I
muted.
don't think we're muted. Maybe she
No,
should
I
mute us.
said-
Right. Probably should mute us.
Should maybe mute us,
Yeah.
or we should all mute ourselves.
Now, why don't we just all mute and then
Oh,
unmute if you need to
all right,
talk?
good idea.
Okay.
We muted ourselves.
Okay, I'm just waiting for Bob to unmute.
Okay, I don't have any questions right now.
All right, my dear, thank you. Mary, any questions for you?
I just want to say that during the course, not only have I appreciated what you told us about the technical parts, you do this and you do that, and this is why you do it. But I love watching you start with one of your photographs that you've already developed in Lightroom and tell why you want to go to the next step, like your grape photograph or the horse photograph. They all look perfect to me when you started. So I thought, how can she make this better? So I really enjoyed that part, Karen. You're, from start to finish, why you
good.
put one on top of another. Yeah.
Great, because we're going to do that again today.
So I'm hoping because I'm hoping I can look at my photographs with the same discerning eye
Oh, you
to
can.
see what you should do next. Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you. I have no doubt that you can do that and will do it. And I have watched you do it in the past. So you're on the right track for that. So thank you, Mary. Okay, Sherwood, any questions?
I've been playing a lot. I've done about 10 or 15 pictures, and
Great.
some terrible, and a couple are keepers.
Oh, fantastic.
The question is, how do you know when you're done?
That's the best question ever.
I always make another layer so I can go back if I mess it up.
Yes. Yeah, so,
But I will have questions for you when we get together for an hour.
okay, great. So the
But
question
other
is,
than that, I'm fine.
okay. So how do we know when we're done? Sometimes it just, a photograph tells you, and it tells you right away, don't touch me. I'm done. I'm fine. Earlier today, as I was preparing for class, I thought I was done with a photo that I'm going to show you. And then I tried another layer. And then I really thought I was done. And then I tried another layer.
Right, right.
Yeah. So really, it's very much about what mood you're in, what intent you had for the photo itself, and then what the photo had to say to you. Because they do talk to us if we are still and listen. And so it just takes a lot of practice. That's all. That's all.
I have some friends who are painters who say the same thing. Sometimes it's hard to know when you're done.
Sometimes it's very difficult to know. I would say this, a lot of things in my photography career were taught to me decades earlier without me knowing it. And that is during my riding career. I rode horses for most of my life. And it's always better to end on a good note than continue to think that you need to teach or do more. Doing more is often the enemy of refinement.
Well, the same thing goes for surgery when I did that.
There you go. So, but we learn that restraint as we, I'll use the riding metaphor again, as we increase our saddle time. As we're there more and more and more, we can take a lighter and lighter and lighter touch and feel like we're getting to the heart of what we want to express with the image. When we first, I will say this, and I hope I said it in the beginning, when we first start texturing, we really throw everything at it, everything in the kitchen sink, you know, because it's a new toy and it's shiny and it's bright and it goes really fast and we love it. And so we want to do more and have more fun with our images. And I think that that impulse takes a good 6 to 9 months to wear off until we begin to just back off a little bit and bring in more subtlety with what we're doing with our images. Okay, but that's a natural process, and you just have to let yourself get in there and play. Okay, thank you, Shirley.
Joanne, it sounded like they were talking about floral design.
Yes.
When you do a flower arrangement, if it comes together really easily, you're done. But if you have to work it too hard, then it's a mess forever.
It's a mess.
Yeah,
that's right.
Same.
And
Yeah.
I did apply that very thinking to my composites with Loss and Beauty. If the composite came together, aside from the polishing the edges, if the composite came together within 5 minutes, I knew it worked. And a couple of times there were images that I really wanted to go together because of historical or autobiographical, or I'm sorry, biographical reasons. 30 minutes later, I'm still fighting it and it's just a mess. And so, yeah, when you get into the mess or the struggle part, just do something else. Okay? Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up to Sherwood's?
Yes.
You made a comment at the end, Sherwood did, that he puts an extra layer before he leaves Photoshop, is that right? And then that lets you come back in? But can you explain that?
I can explain that.
Okay.
If you make a change to your original layer and you mess it up, I've found sometimes you can't go back. So if you have the original layer and you've messed up the extra one, you just throw that away and you go back.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Okay.
That's smart. Okay, thanks.
Okay. I often do duplicate my background layer just so that I make sure that I don't mess anything up in that way. Okay. Ruth.
I have two things. I'm still having trouble painting with black on a white mask. And I wonder if it's a glitch that's greater than I am. I don't know if it's just me, because it doesn't happen every time.
Okay.
And I know I asked that before, and my other one is that I don't understand what textures to look for to go with a particular image. I'm not making that connection.
Okay. All right. We're going to look again today at individual images, and we'll look at the textures that I chose, and I'll walk you through why I chose them. Okay? Okay, cool. Thank you, Ruth. And we will go step by step through the painting and make sure that we're checking. When we're painting on a mask, we have to check 3 things. Number 1, we have our brush tool and not our clone tool or something else. Number 2, our foreground color is black if we're painting on a white mask. Actually, we have a number of things to check. Number 3, we have to check our brush opacity and make sure that we can actually see it. And number 4, we have to make sure that our mask is highlighted, not our texture layer, but the mask on the texture layer.
I have a feeling it has to do with the brush opacity.
I think so.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, now, who have I missed? I know that I've missed. Sandy, questions, my darling? I can't hear you, sweetie. I'm gonna. Okay, still
She's
can't hear
muted.
you.
Sandy is muted.
I know I've unmuted her twice and it's not working. There you
Get
go.
muted. He had to, I think, because she muted
Can
herself.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. You mentioned the last couple of days, I don't remember which, just very quickly passing, that masks and horizontal go together and layers and vertical go together with regards to seeing the history of what we've done, the different layers. Can you expand upon that a bit?
Sure. Let me open. I haven't missed anyone else, have I? Because I can go straight to opening an image then. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And you're all seeing my very messy desktop. I'm going to open Lightroom and Photoshop. I'm going to open this. I'm just opening an image so that I can explain this concept really quickly. It's really easy. Masks affect what is horizontally on the layer, meaning to the left. Okay? Layers affect vertically what is below them. All right? Okay, cool. Okay, we'll say goodbye to Mr. Fusilero. And we'll do this. I've put these in survey mode for us to see, to remind us where we've been. And to talk a little bit very specifically, or to begin to talk again about how it is that we choose the textures that we want to use with our layers. If we have a look at our first choice, which was the loggia in Venice, and somebody spoke up with a very good idea about, oh, I want to see the leaves on top of that. In that instance, we just wanted to play and see what it looked like. I had been speaking specifically about images of different scale, and I used to think that they didn't go together, and then I got rid of that prejudice, and I do use images of different scale and blend them together when I'm making composites. And I often refer to an image that has, as a composite, one that's used another photograph of mine. If I'm referring to a textured image, I'm talking about a photograph of mine with a texture that came from somewhere else, okay? In truth, they're both identical. It's a composite of two images, all right? So we had this image of the loggia with the leaves, and that was kind of fun and interesting to do. And of course, we had our gal on the stairway, which was a lot of fun. And you know, to Mary's point, I mean, I actually love this image on the right, but I'm completely in love with the image on the left now, with those texture layers added, because it looks subtle and it looks natural to me, and it just, I don't know, I think it just looks kind of scrumptious.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then we did this very simple image of the tulip, and I showed you the texture layer, and then we talked about how to turn the texture layer, to rotate it, because in this instance, this image had this frame that was stronger on those corners, and we needed to turn that around and use it in that manner. And then we went to our grapes, just to add depth and to turn the grapes just ever so slightly more purple. And I want to encourage you all to look that deeply into your image, because that change in the color just makes all the difference in the world to me. It's slightly warmer, the grapes are slightly more purpley, less blue than they were on the right-hand side. Okay, and it's our textures that did that for us, if we remember. Now today, I wanted to bring this image back up because, come on, There we go. Because it is a favorite image of mine. And we didn't do anything to it the other day other than use it with a different image. But today, as I was preparing for class, I thought, well, let's see what it looks like if we actually put some textures on it, okay? And here is what I came up with. So that's the before, or sorry, that's the after. Here's the before. Now, again, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Again, I really like the image on the right-hand side. I was pleased when I made it. I was more pleased when I saw it and then made the image, but I'm loving the image on the left-hand side. And as I think you can tell, the texture layers on this are incredibly subtle, and I like that too. So we're going to have a look at the Photoshop image and see what I did to it. And this comes to, it speaks to my point about subtlety as we're working. And I hope that you can perceive some subtlety in this image. Let's turn off these layers. This is where we started. One thing that I wanted to give you as a tip today, and I should have done it in the very first meeting, and my sincere apologies. You'll notice today that my thumbnails are much bigger, and I hope it's making it easier for you to see them. You can make your thumbnails bigger over here on our layers palette by going to this drop-down menu, and we go down to panel options. So let me show you again. So here we are in our layers palette, or our layers panel, sorry, and we open this drop-down menu. We go to panel options, and then you can choose, okay? So I just chose the largest thumbnail to help everybody to see. Okay, is that all right? Everyone's okay with that? All righty, so here we are with 3 different layers. And I chose the first layer, and I'm going to turn it to normal so that you can see what it looks like. I chose the first layer because of the affinity with this layer for what was underneath. And the affinity meaning there's texture, but there's a little bit of, you know, shapes and scratches and things going on here that are similar to the leaves. But it's that warm golden color. It's a texture layer that's lighter in the center than it is on the edges. And that's why I put it on the image. And I had that at overlay at about 87%. So here's before, and here's after. Before, after. And what I like so much about this texture is that it's pushed us into our blue-orange harmony with the colors. Because the edges of the texture are darker and cooler, it's increased the saturation in the blue tones that were there. And in my opinion, with the center of the texture that is gold colored, it brought up more interest in the center. Right now, it's very subtle and very refined. Okay, I'm waiting. Okay, I was waiting for the connection to stabilize. But with the gold in the center of this texture layer, it brings in a better color. Okay, and so as I said, I thought I was done because I really like this image just the way that it is. And then I thought, well, no, because I had already picked out these other 2 textures, and I thought, well, just carry on and see what happens. So I came up to this next texture, and it's a very subtle difference. Let me turn it up so you can see what the difference would be. So that's at soft light at 100% opacity. It's luscious and it's like you want to eat it with a spoon, and that's all marvelous, but it's too much, okay? And at first I liked it, and then I thought, oh no, it's just way too in your face. So here's before, and here's after. And again, this texture, because it has a lot of the golden tones, has underscored what I wanted to do with the image, which was to bring up the golds and increase the blues. And this is what the texture layer did, but then I brought it all the way back to about, and I'm going to leave it at 27%. So that's before and that's after. And as you can see, there is a little bit darkened around the edges as well. And then the final layer that I put on is a layer called Juniper Berry. And I turned it on in soft light at only 54% opacity. And it did the same thing again, a touch stronger vignetting, a little more intensity in the blues, and there we are. Now, if I were to go back to which I am, here we are, I think that when I put this layer on, if you look closely at the thumbnail, it has a predominantly blue tone down the middle. So if I turn that off and turn it on, I think I'd like to put a layer mask on this, which I do just by going down to the add layer mask, the rectangle with a hole in the middle, click on it because my active layer was the one I was choosing. And now, Ruth, I'm going to go over, I'm going to make sure that my brush is turned to black here on the lower left-hand side. I'm going to choose my brush, and my opacity right now is at 25% and my flow is at 50%. And I think that's okay because I want to be careful about brushing out. You see this blue vein right here in my thumbnail? That's what I want to take out. And my image should get warmer right there if I do that. So here's where I just painted, and I painted that out. And because my opacity is low, I'm having to stroke over and over to bring it up, just to make sure that I don't have any of these blue streaks getting in the way of my golden warm color here in the center. So before and after, before and after. And I'm happy with that because there's no change, no color change with my leaves in the center. Turn these off again. So here's my initial image. I want to point out that this image was made in what we call open shade. So I was under a whole bunch of trees. They didn't have very many leaves on them, to be sure, but they were so dense that the ground was in what we would call open shade. So a lot of reflected light around so that we could see all of the details in the leaves. But then I want more richness in this image. So again, the first layer, and as you can see, I did put a mask on this, and I'm going to disable this layer mask so you can see the difference. It got too dark on the sides. And so I painted out, there we are, without me painting. So I painted out these darker, the corners just got too dark and just too, you know, they were just falling away. So you can look at my mask and see that there's gray shading in the lower left, a bit more gray shading on the lower right, and just a touch in the upper left-hand corner and in the upper right-hand corner. And in fact, I'm going to put a little more right there. And I think you can see on my layer mask that as I'm clicking and painting here, this layer mask has gotten much darker. Does everyone see that? Right here in the corner?
Yes.
Okay. So the next layer that I put on is this, and it is only at 27% in soft light. Now, Sherwood, here's where I have a hard time deciding if I'm done or not. Is that the right percentage? Does it need to be more? Should it be less? You know, this is the fine tuning that we get into. Okay? You see, right now I'm liking it a little bit more intense there. So there we are. And then finally, the juniper berry on top in soft light at 54%. And that is just slightly deepening those tones. Any questions about that?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when, after you after you put layer 2 on it, then you looked at it again and reevaluated the tones to see what you wanted to bring out further?
Yes.
Could you show us layer 2 again, please?
Yes. So here's my image, and I see lots of blues, I see oranges, I see some gold, and I see these veins of things, and I see some more gold tones over here that I want to enhance. And so I chose this texture that has deep blues on the sides and golds right in the middle, roughly where I wanted them to be. And then I popped it on. So before, after. So I haven't changed the original intent of the image, which was to say, hey, look at the force.
May I say something for just
Yes.
a moment? There's a little delay between what you're doing and what we're seeing and hearing, just a little smidgen. So sometimes if you just wait a second when you switch from one picture to another, we'll be looking at the same picture you're wanting us to look at.
Thank you, Suzette. Thank
Hope
you
that
so much.
makes sense.
Okay, of course it does. So what I'm saying about this image is that the texture layer that I've put on, and here's before, the texture layer that I'm looking for is to enhance what is already in the image. That meaning I want to bring out the golds and the oranges that are there, and I want to enhance the blues on the edges of the image. And so I added the texture layer, and I looked for the texture layer first and added the texture layer that did just do exactly that. So it didn't change the intent of the image at all, okay? And so then as I was looking through my texture layers, I chose 3 of them at one time and brought them all in. And that's when I was saying, well, you know, I think I'm done, but I've already chosen these. Let me see what they look like. And so here's the 3rd layer, again at soft light, only at 38% opacity, with a pretty strong mask to make sure that I don't have any blue tones competing with my yellow and my gold and orange tones right here in the center. Does everyone understand that mask and what it's affecting?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last layer was the juniper berry layer, which is just an overall, a slightly cooler tone, a little deeper on the edges, and then I think it's finished. Okay. All right. So we are going to say goodbye to this image, and we'll let it save, and we'll go back out to Lightroom. The next image I wanted to walk you through is this image. This is an image that has a couple of different photographs in it, as well as 2 textures. It's an image that I made in the Keukenhof garden. We started earlier in the week when I showed you this image. So on the right-hand side was the cherry tree that I turned into the night sky. And then just to the left, over by the building, was this image that we see on the right-hand side. This is just a straight reflection shot. And we can see here what it looked like before it was textured and layered. Okay. And I think that you can see that there is a fair amount of difference in this image, but it still looks very much like—
It's not changing.
It's not changing?
Karen, we missed a lot of that because the photos weren't changing on our screens as quickly as your conversation was.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I have no explanation for why this is being so problematic today. Okay, what I was saying about this is just to compare the original photo on the right with the finished photo on the left. And so now we'll go to this image and we'll open it in Photoshop.
We've lost her. Rats. Oh, there she is, back again.
I
Yay.
think we all need to mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, it keeps muting it. I'm not muting it, but it keeps doing it. So, okay, here I am. Now I have to share screen because it just turned off everything. Okay, can everyone see now my Photoshop screen? Okay, thank you, Mary. I'm going to move this over. On the right-hand side, I think you can see that there are a lot of layers. I'm going to go very slowly so that we can catch everything here. First, I'm going to turn off all of the eyeballs. Okay, everybody still with me? Okay, on the background, we have the original layer, which is simply a reflection of a cherry tree in blossom at high noon. And my first layer is simply a clone layer to get rid of those ugly white spots that you might see blinking now. And so I put the clone layer always as an additional layer. And of course, we remember that we create an additional layer by going down to the icon second from the right that says create a new layer. And we don't have to have a texture layer or anything like that to go in there. These we can use for clone, healing, and various actions like that. So this is simply a clone layer. The next layer I put on is an image layer. And that is an image that I made that is defocused in roughly the same area that these branches were. So before, and you can see that it has a very light tonality to it because it was high noon that day and it was this bluebird sky. And though the shapes of the reflection were very interesting, the blue was just too bright for me. And so here is a different image. And you can, if you look closely into the image in this center area, you can see little halo effects and different things that are beginning to come in. Now I'll turn it off. And those halo effects are gone. And then I'll turn it back on, and here they start coming in. Those are simply defocused cherry blossoms that have fallen onto the water. And I liked what this layer did, but I wanted it to have a stronger effect. And so this layer was brought in overlay mode at 42% opacity. And so I simply duplicated it. And when I duplicated the entire layer, by dragging it down to the add layer, it also duplicated the mask that I had already done. So I didn't have to repaint that. And so there's my second layer, and I brought that one in soft light, not in overlay, but in soft light. It just has a little more subtle effect and only at 54%. And then I thought, okay, I'm getting somewhere. I like this. But then I wanted some actual texture to grunge it up a little bit. And so I brought in this ceviche texture layer and made this change. So that's what it looked like before. I'm going to go slowly. And then here we have it after. And I would point out that the ceviche layer has a layer mask where I've blocked out most of the effect of it on this left-hand side. I just didn't like the way that it looked over there with that. It was just too dark. And so I've disabled that layer mask and you can see what it looks like. And now I'm going to go back and enable the layer mask so you can see the change that was affected. So it just brought some brightness back into this upper left-hand corner and on this left side. In fact, I think I'm going to do it some more. So I'm going to highlight my layer mask. I'm going to make sure that I'm painting in black over on the left-hand side. I'm going to grab my brush and I'm at 25% opacity. And I'm just going to block out a little more of that effect. And so you can see the change that's happening in my layer mask. Okay. Then I wanted to change the hue, the color of the color, basically. And so are we there?
You're up to hue.
Very good. So I just wanted to show you that I desaturated that ceviche layer by putting a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top. And remember, we find our adjustment layers right down here. And so in this instance, I used hue and saturation. Okay. And then I pinned it to the layer below. Remember, we use the Option key to get our little crooked arrow so that we can clip or pin this adjustment to this layer only, because I only wanted to affect the color of the ceviche layer. And it's a very subtle change, but there it is. Now, I'm still not done. This is a very involved image. I wanted to add a new image to it to bring more depth to the bottom and into the blue specifically. And so I chose this image layer that I had created, again, a very defocused image shooting down into the water where the cherry blossoms were. So I added the next layer in overlay mode at 78%. And I thought, okay, if one's good, why not put two? Because I liked the effect that the bubbles were having and that the whole thing was having, but this one I felt was too dark. And so the next layer, when I put it on in screen mode. And we haven't used screen mode before. So this is a new effect here. So here's before, and we can see the darkening that's happening, or that had happened with that layer below. And here's the after, which brought in some more of the bubbles and this kind of depth, but made it a little brighter. And if you look in the layer on the right-hand side, you can see, because screen makes things brighter, that I painted out the effect in roughly this area because it was already bright enough. Okay. Next, I added a curves layer to just slightly brighten my upper left-hand corner because I felt it was too dark. So there's without the curves layer. and here's with the curves layer. So that you can see predominantly on the mask, when we do an adjustment layer, we often invert that mask by using Command I, and I've painted out the effect, I've revealed the effect of the curves layer on my left-hand side, which was simply to brighten that area. Everybody hanging in? Okay. On the next layer, you can see I have a very different looking mask. It has all kinds of colors. The texture layer itself is called brushed rose, and I use it a great deal. And I brought it in here because I felt like my colors in the top of the image were being lost. And so I added the brushed rose, and it brought the pinks and the golds and the very soft greens back in with a little more power. And I brought that in overlay mode at 81%. And then finally, I added this layer again, and then I said, no, it's too much, and I'm taking it away. So I'm going to go back to the bottom, take all these away. So here is the beginning image. The first layer was our clone layer to get rid of those nasty white spots. The next layer, the next two layers are simply image layers that I added because they have these defocused areas and soft areas in them. And then I added the texture layer, which added a great deal of depth to everything, but I didn't like the color, and so I shifted it just a tiny bit. And then I added two more image layers to add more of those little sparkly blobbies. And it ended up brightening just a tiny bit, especially when I added the curves layer to increase the light on the left-hand side of the image. And then to boost my color here, and in this area of the image, I used this brushed rose and brought the color back in where I felt it had gone lacking. Okay.
I have some questions.
Please.
Now, good time. Okay, for instance, on layer 3 and the copy of layer 3, you
Okay.
masked it in two different places.
Yes.
Could you show us layer 3 again?
So here is layer 3, and it is in opacity, it is in overlay mode at 78% opacity. Okay, so this is before and then after. Most of the effect that's taking place is in the bottom of the image, the bottom third, and the right-hand side. As you can see, I've masked out the effect on the left-hand upper side. Okay? And then I copied that layer, I copied the image layer, and then added a different mask in screen mode to lighten some areas that had gotten just a little too dark, but I blocked out the effect of the screen here in this area because it is already very bright, so I didn't want to make it brighter still.
Okay,
Does that help, Ruth?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Nobody?
I'm still struggling with these masks.
Myself first. I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So how do you determine whether to add a curve adjustment or add a second layer to lighten a specific area? Because I feel like you lightened 2 different times, but you used 2 different methods. And what would you say is the difference between those 2 methods?
The difference is in how, when we lighten with screen mode, which is what we've done here, it has a slightly different effect in the image. And it's more of, it's like turning the lights on in the image. Like when we use overlay or soft light, there's a depth that goes into the image with those 2 blending modes that is also present when we use a screen mode. Additionally, I'm only using screen mode as I'm using an image, okay? And remember, when I go to my adjustment layer, I'm wanting to affect everything. But when I'm using a screen mode, I'm really only affecting the way this image comes in. Okay, a curves adjustment or any other adjustment, hue and saturation or what have you, unless you clip it, is affecting the entire image. A blending mode on an image is only affecting that layer. It's not affecting everything else below it. And so
Sorry,
here,
Karen, may I just interrupt you for just a second, because I don't want to forget what I need to ask you. And you just said something. You said, unless you clip it. Is it the same you mean as what, unless you pin it to the layer below? Clipping it or pinning it?
clip it,
Thing?
yes, that's
Okay,
exactly
sorry.
right.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and so this blending mode is affecting this image in screen, and it does happen to be a slightly lightening type of thing. I just want to change this. So here it is in darken, and here it is in lighten, and here it is in screen. I probably did that too fast. Here it is in darken. And then here it is in lighten. And then it's different still when we go to screen. So using the blending mode on an image to lighten is only affecting this thumbnail image that I have right here. Okay, but using an adjustment is affecting everything below it in that basically curves as an exposure adjustment. Okay, does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, and obviously it's just experiment, experiment, experiment.
That is exactly right. An experiment times 300.
Lots of experimenting.
Yes, but the important thing that I have to offer to each of you is the mechanics of how we do it and conceptually how we can work our way into it. The mechanics are deeply, deeply important. Obviously, we can't do it unless we know how to do it technically. But we have to get the concepts of why this mask only affects this image layer, okay? And yet this adjustment layer affects everything below. All right, and that's go ahead.
I think I understand that, but I guess part of my question is in the layer that you made a copy of.
Yes.
Oh, okay, so the first layer 3, you made an adjustment in the mask on the right hand side of it. And when you go up to copy that layer, that is already in place. Is that correct? And then you added more?
In this instance, if this layer mask was already here, and I drug this layer down to copy it, which is to bring it right here, it would also appear. And in that instance, because I might not necessarily have wanted that, because remember I changed blending modes completely.
Oh.
This is supposed to be screen. I went from an overlay blending mode which has a completely different effect than a screen blending mode. So then I had to basically get rid of that mask by dragging it to the trash, what would have been the prior mask, and put a new mask on. So if I had copied this and just drug it down and brought it to the add layer or duplicate layer, then it would have showed up here just like that.
Okay.
Okay, and I would have had to then throw away this mask, put a new mask on when I changed my blending mode to have the effect that I wanted it to have. Okay, now I know that this is a complicated image, but here we are on our last day, and I'm just pushing everybody's buttons, kind of on purpose, but not wanting to confuse either. My wish is that we can look at this layers stack and see that the exact same concept was used in every instance. Well, not in this instance, because this was a clone layer, all right? But then when we go here, we have an image. We have it in a blending mode. And then we applied a mask to block out the effect of this image in this blending mode in this area of the image itself. And then I duplicated this and made a copy, left the exact copy of the mask in place. And this is in soft light blending mode, whereas before we were in overlay. And I often do that. Use an overlay blending mode, which is a pretty deep effect at some opacity or another. And then if I want something just a tiny bit more, I'll come back with soft light and then work with that opacity as well. And then,
I have one other question.
please.
I'm a little confused about whether the clone layer that you made, you chose to make a clone layer to get rid of those little spots. Could you have also made an adjustment layer to get rid of those little spots?
No.
Or you cannot do that in an adjustment?
You cannot
Okay.
do that in an adjustment layer. You have
There's
to create
certain attributes that work in one kind of layer than another that I'm not real clear about yet, but I will get there.
Okay, that's right. So to make a clone layer to repair an image, you go simply to your little add a duplicate layer here and click it, and it'll pop right in. And then you can clone or paint in your image or do what you need to do in that way. This is not an adjustment layer like curves or hue and saturation or contrast or anything like this. This is simply an empty layer that we could go over, and it's most often that we grab our clone tool and come over here and fix an issue. Okay? Now I'm going to get rid of that extra layer I just created. An adjustment layer can only be created right here with that little black and white cookie, and that gives us our choices of adjustments. And the ones that we will use most often would be curves and hue and saturation, or if you wanted to turn your image to black and white, but I recommend that you do that in Lightroom. Okay, so curves and hue and saturation. All right, all of these other adjustments, selective color, threshold, posterize, invert, color lookup, well, all of these on the bottom, color lookup, channel mixer, most of these are for graphic designers. And so we have to know which tools that we want to use as photographers to manipulate our image. Okay? Do we feel done with this image? Okay. I'm going to Command S. We'll save that. We'll wait for that. We'll go back to Lightroom. And I'm going to open one of my composited images from Loss and Beauty Part 2. Now, this image does not have any kind of texture. This is simply two images blended together. Well, and this is a flattened image. Let's go back here.
So Karen, since you just said it was a flattened image,
Yes.
you flattened this one because you knew you wouldn't want to change it at all afterwards? Because earlier you were saying you rarely, if ever, flatten.
I flattened it because it had to go out to a printer as a flattened image and a PSD. Okay, a printer meaning an offset printer, a printing company. So that's how that got flattened. And I had just forgotten. Okay, here, as I said, these are two images, all right? And I don't think that, and I hope that none of you is ever going to have to confront this subject matter in the way that I have confronted it. But when I'm choosing how to blend images for Loss and Beauty, I am always thinking about the depth of the story that's there. The image that you see on your screen is an image from Majdanek. It's one of the first 4 death camps, being Belzec, Majdanek, Treblinka, and Sobibor. And the very first one was Belzec. And in each of these camps, they kept notebooks that they actually, they meaning the Nazis, that they improved upon and took notes about. And every time they built a new camp, they would take what they learned in the camp before and employ those lessons. And so the reason that I came and added then this layer on the bottom is because the layer that I've just added is a frozen ash pond in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And so my intent is to show that all of the lessons that took place in these first 4 death camps then were horribly perfected and used then in Auschwitz-Birkenau. So that's the why behind why I put these 2 images together. And we are looking at the how. So this is a very straightforward blending of 2 images. We can see on the bottom, I'll just take this off again, that it's just a straightforward scene that, well, it's not so straightforward. I happened to catch it when there was a wonderful sky and the snow had come and was blowing from behind me over toward the left and coating these posts. So they stand out very strongly. And then when I added in my layer here, you can see I have a pretty involved mask. Let me disable the mask. So you can see that in my original image, there was much too much darkness in the reflection on the ice from Auschwitz-Birkenau. So I had to paint those things out. Additionally, you can see some changes, some very subtle changes here in this area. The greatest change was right here in the middle. It was just simply too dark. But then right along the back here, there were a couple of things that were painted out. So I will disable this mask. And if you can look closely, you will see that I have a very strong line across the top of this image. And that line can't be there. My composites are such that it's very hard to tell, nearly impossible to tell where one image begins and the other ends. And so with this mask then enabled, I've taken great care to get rid of this very hard line. And now it's gone. This layer is correcting a little dirt spot here on the left-hand side. It's very tiny. And finally, the curves layer on the top was simply to darken the sky a little bit. Now, I did add a layer mask so that I've blocked out the effect of the curves layer on the bottom and just very subtly let it in the top of this image. So that is before, without this curves adjustment, and that's after. And so we can see here, because I had a specific question about blending images together and not just texture layers, that we have to pay very close attention to how the images go together. Where are the edges? Is there a natural transition? Why did we blend them in the first place? Are you trying to tell a story? Are you trying to create mystery in your image? Do you want to, for example, have people walking amidst a forest in the mist or something like that? We have to have an idea or a concept about what it is that we're trying to say before we can successfully execute it. This image I know will be a very important part of Loss and Beauty Part 2. And just overall, I'm happy with the image. In the reflection in the bottom, in the frozen part of the image, when I am showing you this area right here, or this area, that at first glance seems to be a reflection of the poles, and this one is much larger, but again, I'm only talking about impressions. At first glance, it looks like one of these poles itself being reflected. In fact, those are trees. And this image in the ice was made a number of years ago. But when I was at Majdanek and I saw this image with these poles, I thought, oh, finally, I can use these frozen ponds and blend them with the poles of the fence that are sticking up like that. Okay?
So sometimes you're able to take your photographs with the intention of using them together, and sometimes it happens as it.
In fact, Ruth, that's a very good comment. In fact, the only way I've been able to work on this project for this entire time, since 2011, is to go be, it takes me a couple of days to get completely open to what's in front of me, and I make the best available photograph. Now, because I am steeped in the history and the literature of this time, I knew about this layering of experience and perfecting the death camps. Auschwitz-Birkenau was the final expression of that perfecting mechanism. And finally, because this was the first time that I visited Majdanek, first of all, I made this image because I really like the image. You know, I've got no issue with this as an image all by itself. It's stark. It is layers upon layers upon layers of barbed wire. It fits the narrative, certainly, of what I wanted to speak about. But I didn't have an idea in the moment that I clicked the shutter. Later then, when I'm back and thinking about compositing images, and I don't composite as I'm off out working, I do it when I come back home, then I knew that I could blend this image from Auschwitz-Birkenau together. So that's a long answer to say simply that I work very hard to get open to the sorrow and despair that is there and make photographs the best way that I can possibly make them. And then when I come home, I see which photographs speak with each other. And precisely because I have done so much reading and my heart is, there's always a portion of my heart active in this project, I remember all of the history of everything, and then I can put them together in that manner. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to show you an image that doesn't work yet, and then we're going to wrap up with final questions. Okay, here we are. This is a composited image of a place in Lithuania that was the turning point early on in the war, that caused Himmler to understand that he had to create death camps. And this is not a history lesson, this is about Photoshop. But the area in the center of the image, the round area that you see, is a great large area. It's about 100+ feet across. And this was it was originally, when the Soviets were given this, you know, the east side of Poland, and what would then return back to Lithuania. It was originally a fuel storage area in the forest where there were 8 of these great large pits in the ground that were to be turned into fuel storage. It didn't happen. The Germans came back in 41 and started pushing the Russians out again. And when the Germans came to this forest, this is the forest of Ponar, they saw these great large pits and said, fabulous, we can murder people in these pits and leave them here. So I was there, it was turning dark, and I made an image of one of these areas in Ponar. The image on the right that you see, combined with this, is an image of a hideout in a forest that was about 25 kilometers from here, maybe a little bit further, maybe 40 kilometers. And I met the woman who lived 2.5 years in this forest, in this hideout. She's 99 years old now. She was a resistance fighter, and she did amazing things during the war. All of that as background to, photo edit in Photoshop, to why I made this composite. The answer is, of course, that she hid out in the forest because she escaped the ghetto that they had put in Vilnius on the very last night. And after that, the remaining people in Vilnius, predominantly Jews, were murdered in Ponar. So she escaped that area. So what we have here, let's go down to the bottom. Here's the first image without all these masks and everything else. Here's the first image. This is this great, massive, circular area. And as I began to layer, let's show you the second image. This is the area in the forest. I can turn that off. So this is the hideout. And I knew I wanted to put these 2 images together because of the personal narrative that I just shared with you. Doing it, however, became a challenge, because when you're blending images together, you're often having to create very complicated masks that take out parts of the image and expose images underneath and darken or brighten certain areas and fix certain areas, and it becomes a whole mask game. Each of these layers, as you can see, if we look at this little icon, is an adjustment layer. And these 2 adjustment layers were applied almost all over the entire image, except, well, this one was inverted and just revealed in the top, yes, and in the bottom. This is a color balance. We haven't talked about this, but I think that you can tell that without this layer, you see that the image now has gone very, very magenta toward the bottom. And then with it, it brings it back into a more natural tone. So this was a color balance adjustment layer. This is a curves layer, just to brighten the entire image, because putting two fairly dark images on top of each other makes a very dark image. So you have to come back and brighten things up a bit. This was a curves layer just working here in the center of the image to bring more natural transition in the image. And finally, a curves layer to bring in, and I haven't finished this, you can see that there's an error here on this tree trunk. Anyhow, this curves layer just brought in more of that tree trunk. Okay. So I realize that this again is a very detailed layer and masking. My point is this: you only get here by understanding the concepts of how the masks affect the image and how adjustment layers affect everything below, and how you can only show little tiny bits of it. For example, in this very top curves layer, when I turn it on, you can see by the layer mask that only that tiny little area where it's white, where it's brushed out, that's the only area I'm affecting, which is right here in the center of this image. And so once we understand that an image is an image and a mask affects the image that's beside it, and then every layer that we put on top of that affects everything below, then the concept starts to cement itself for us, and we can very easily create complicated images like this that we want to blend together. But I didn't start out doing this the very first time I was doing texturing and layering. I didn't start it actually. I never had a thought to blend two actual images together until I came back in late 2011 from photographing with intent to make Loss and Beauty. It came to me after that 2-week trip again, how I would tell the story that I wanted to tell. And it was through composited images. So I had to learn how to see deeply into my images, know how to affect very particular areas, and get a feel, get an instinct, if you will, for which adjustment layer I wanted to use to make that change. Did I want to darken? Did I want to lighten? That's probably going to be a curves layer. Did I want to change the hue of my overall image? That's going to be a color balance layer or a hue and saturation layer. Okay. I'm going to save that, go here, and go here, stop sharing, and bring everybody back up. I would invite you to unmute, and we can have a little talk here. I know that that was a lot to put on the end, and I could have ended with a tulip image or something like that, but I do want to show you that you can go to this area of complexity, and it can get even a whole lot more complex after that. But that doesn't mean that you should. In fact, I encourage you to truly start simply. Start with an image like my tulip image that we did, which is just a straight on macro image of a tulip, and put some layers and textures on it, and just play. And that way you'll teach yourself, how do I add the next texture layer? How do I change my blending mode? Am I getting my mask in the right place? Am I able to paint on my mask to block out certain areas? And do that kind of thing. And slowly, 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 what you're doing is cementing the concepts and cementing the skills that you can then truly very easily go to making very complex images that are melded together. Okay? Okay.
Could you
I
say
love that last image that you would never know that it was a composite.
Yeah,
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you. That was a pivotal moment for me, for sure.
I bet it was.
Wow.
Yeah. But the best part was a hopeful part, and that was meeting Fania at 99 years old, living on her own, sharp as a tack, and happy to tell me, a stranger who walked into her home in Vilnius, Lithuania, and tell me about her story. It was
Karen, I'm sorry if I missed this because I had to go deal with a couple things there, but
okay.
how did you actually get introduced to her and how did you get into her home?
Oh, that's a very good question. I work with one of the world's most eminent historians about Jewish life between the wars and in the shtetls. His name is Dr. Tomasz Cebulski, and he is the liaison for almost everything that the Shoah Foundation and Steven Spielberg does in Poland, as well as the USHMM. And when I was first contemplating going in 2011, happily, a dear friend of mine named Honey Lazar, a tremendously talented photographer, said, there's only one person that you need to meet, and that is Dr. Tomasz Cebulski. She met him because her college roommate is Sarah, and Sarah's last name is escaping me right now, which is ridiculous, but she's the director of USHMM. And so this is very high level stuff, and I'm just incredibly fortunate to have him now as a dear friend. And when I'm in Poland, I'm always with Dr. Cebulski. So he knew Fania. He's been working there and working in genealogy and all of the history for the last 25 years. He's still a young man. He's an incredibly brilliant person. He has 2 doctorates in international relations and something else. And the Polish government uses him when they're having a fight with the Israeli government, and the Israeli government uses him when they're having a fight with the Polish government, which they often are. So he is, well, he's just an incredible friend and has helped me, and helped me particularly to understand in a much more personal way the depth of the loss that was created, because he took me out to the shtetls. That you can't understand what Auschwitz means until you see what happened to the communities. And so now I spend most of my time out in the communities. And well, it's pretty meaningful. So.
And Karen was going to take Donald and me, Shelley and Paul this October, but maybe next April.
Yes.
On that same on a trip.
Yes.
To meet both of them.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, back to compositing.
We'll do it.
Thank you, my dear. Well, we don't, what we need to do is just make sure that everyone sends me an email that we get scheduled for our one-on-one. I'm a little bit blocked up next week because I'm beginning to teach my 5-day intensive class through the Pacific Northwest Art School, which means each evening of mine, each morning of yours next week, I'm busy for 5 hours. If we can meet together a little earlier, if you're an early bird, or it can be later, then we can fit things in for next week. I do have one spot open for tomorrow evening. Sunday is completely booked up, but just send me emails and let's see what we can work out, because I do want to have the privilege of working with you on a one-on-one basis and answering any questions that are lingering. Okay? Okay. All right, my friends. I can't believe it's come to the end. This has been a lot of fun for me.
Thank you,
A lot of
Karen.
fun.
Been wonderful. We
Fabulous.
may have to have a round 2 at some point.
You've left us with so many.
After we've had time to
abilities.
mess around on our own.
Yes, after you've had time. And I do invite you to send me suggestions for classes that you'd like to have. You know, I'm not a Photoshop expert. I'm not, well, I'm pretty good at Lightroom, but I'm not a Photoshop expert. I know what I do and how to do it and why it happens in the way that it does. But there are other things to explore in Photoshop if you wanted to do that, selections being the next logical step. But we could have a review of this and then go on into selections or whatever we wanted to do. I'm here and we're all not going anywhere for a while. So I would welcome your suggestions. I would also welcome and ask you if you would just give me one line or two with your permission to use on my website so that other people can know that somebody else thought I was a pretty good teacher or not. And having said that, I also invite you, please, most sincerely, tell me what you would change. Because, you know, this is new for all of us. And I do want to offer what I'm doing in the best way possible. And so my ears are open to whatever you would have changed. Okay? I thank you all from all of my heart. Be well, stay safe, and I'll see each of you soon, okay?
Thanks, Karen.
Inshallah.
Thank you, Karen.
We're sad.
I know, I'm sad too. I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna
I
cry.
know.
And take care of yourself.
I am.
Yeah, most importantly.
Most important.
Thank you all. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.